Welcome to Behind the Headlines from Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jewish people. My guest today is Alex Winston, the news editor of the Jerusalem Post and one-time Leeds, not just supporter, you grew up in Leeds, as I recall. Yeah. So Alex, welcome to Australia. Welcome to Behind the Headlines. Tell us a little bit about yourself and I think most interestingly, about the news desk at the Jerusalem Post. How's that all left?
Well, first and foremost, thank you very, very much for having me today. Yeah, as you just mentioned, Leeds, born and bred, grew up there, 21 years, studied in Manchester, so travelled around the north a lot of Manchester, and unfortunately, and I came to Israel. We were family, so Judaism was very important to us, Zionism less so. Israel was there, it was always in the background, and we were glad it was there, paramount for the Jewish people, but we weren't the kind of families, Jewish families around the world who Israel is there. It's the very vacation spot for the year, and we travel all over the world. And I didn't come for the first time until I was 16 with Ep.73, the youth group, the Federation of Zionist Youth. And literally changed my life completely because from then I came back every year. First, I was a bit unsure, what people are like dealing with Israelis, dealing with the culture a bit. And then completely caught the bug. And at 21 became, volunteered for the army, called up the girlfriend and said, I'm never coming back. This is it, this is the hope. And not been back since. And it's been...
And you still have family?
Everybody, my family's still in Leeds. And my wife's family is still in Manchester. So we still have a lot of important things in England. Obviously, we take on what's going on in England in general with a lot of care and worry. You still have friends and family there. And we head back, once a year to visit, see the old country and stuff.
I'd like to talk about your view of how London is going, how it is moving for the Jewish community. Let's start with the Jerusalem Post, incredibly famous world-class newspaper. You're the news editor. How does that work?
Well, I'm first and foremost, very privileged and very proud, to work for such an old established newspaper. It was founded as we discussed before, as the Palestine Post. Yeah. Predates the States. It's from 1932, so we are 94, 95 years old already. And
funny you don't look it.
You figure what to be as very easy. And I started off right at the bottom as a desk writer working on our breaking news desk, dealing with, for example, today, we just had to the terror attack this morning, so we would kind of be the front lines, getting that up online, getting a story up online, getting it break into the world. And from there, I progressed my personal journey to being a manager of the news desk. And a couple of years ago, just after October 7th, there was a few personnel changes. We had a new editor-in-chief come on board, Sika Klein, who was well known to the Australian Jewish community. And he decided to sort of pull me up with him to become the news editor. The role was slightly vacant for a few months. There was sort of a hybrid role before that. There hadn't been a specific news editor before that for a while. So I was thrust into it, and I deal with, a speech to the reporters every day. We work out what's stirring up, what we want to focus on, what the stories are. And obviously, we evolve that throughout the day, depending on breaking news and things like that. It's so much fun. And the one thing I will say is, at the end of the day, when there's a paper still in print, which I'm very glad to see, but not just a website, there's a tangible sense of pride in the work that you're putting here. You get to hold it in your hands and open the pages and see the work that you've all done together as a team, and it's fantastic achievements. And obviously, we are sort of a bastion for the English-speaking Jewish world, those outside of Israel who want to know what's going on here, and also for Anglos here in Israel itself as well.
Yeah. I know we've got a lot that I want to go through with you, but I'd like to start, if I may, with your impressions of England, Jewish community, the Stam government. What's your take on what's happening there let's zoom out, from a zoom out perspective? What's your take on what's happening? And then as the eternal Christian that we ask everyone in Israel, how optimistic, how pessimistic, and how between the two are you about the future of the Jewish community of the UK?
So Emma, it's a great question. The example I always give is my personal example, is I'm growing up in Leeds. You know, we used to go to synagogue every single Shabbat, every single week. And, you know, there was a guy on the door on the inside, but you could walk in, the gate was open, and everything was fine. Yeah, that has not changed. So that, again, is the physical proof that I can see there is a gate with a guard physically sort of outside the synagogue premises, ready to let you in. If you just know you can ask the questions, you know, where you're from, why you're interested in coming in. So I physically have seen this change take place. You know, obviously, as I mentioned, been here for 15 years, but from my childhood, now I can see that it's less sick, sound strife. You know, we were used to the odd things, either graffiti, spray painting, or this and that, which I think every Jewish community around the world is. And I think it's so important as well to say, it depends how you look at things. You know, unfortunately, I can spend an hour on Twitter, which is not the healthiest place in the world. X had come away the most pessimistic person in the world thinking, yeah, that's it, the future's doomed. You know, the only place for Jews is Israel. And obviously, speaking to fouling stuff, day to day, the reality is slightly different. The past year alone has been hard. You know, we've seen the Heaton Park attack in Manchester on Yom Kippur, which is a road and a synagogue and place that I know very, very well, as my in-laws live just down the road. So to see somewhere that you know is shocking. We have people in London getting beaten up just for speaking Hebrew. You know, you see things, marches on the streets. Obviously, we'll touch on October 7th and how that changed sort of everything, I think, for the Jewish world. But I think you have to be exceedingly naive to pretend that it's not getting worse and that there are real issues when there were people driving through the streets of the United Kingdom, you know, calling for Jews to be killed. Whether they're connected to Israel or not, you know, this is attacks on Jews. So I think we have to be realistic. Most people probably would say day-to-day is absolutely fine and it'll never happen to us. But I think overall, and I think maybe we're seeing this globally, you know, especially after Bondi, things like that in Australia, the sea get worse and worse. Jews have to be more careful. We have to be careful of how we look, how we dress, the languages we speak.
It's a worrying sign to be Jewish. So let's talk about the government, what the government in England is doing. I don't want to go into the strength or weakness of the Starn government. That's a political conversation. One thing we know in Australia, to the Prime Minister's credit, even though he was dragged to do it, we have a Royal Commission. Nowhere else in the world have I seen anything come close to a judicial inquiry at that level of inquiring into what's going on and what do we do about it. Now, whether or not there are recommendations that will change anything is a secondary issue. In England, it seems to be very similar to what Australia's been doing in the last years. Oh, we don't tolerate anti-Semitism and we'll give you more money for brick walls and security guards, and now leave us alone. Is that what's happening there, or is there actually more going on?
No, I definitely think that is what is going on. I think governments, and it isn't just the Starmer government, you know, this does sort of reach back into the Conservatives slightly, although one could contend they were certainly friendlier to Israel. Yes. But in terms of the Jewish community, I think the Jews that I've spoken to, and they've been many, feel unsafe, they feel unprotected, they feel that the government isn't taking them seriously. Like you said, there's a lot of posturing. The usual statements come out after any attack of we condemn this, we condemn that. But the reality that we're seeing on the streets is slightly different. And it does tie in somewhat to the Israel thing. You know, a good example is through the marches that we see here. So October 7th, how the pro-Palestinian marches can do X. Other marches, pro-Israel or pro-United Kingdom, can do Y, and how they're framed completely different. I think another problem with the United Kingdom is every single time anti-Semitism gets mentioned, somebody, being a politician in Parliament or whether pops up with a full what about Islamophobia. And this Islamophobia tag is always tapped onto and as if they're the same kind of problem, you know, and it's racism against the religion or discrimination against the religion. So it's one big problem we had to deal with, and that clearly isn't the case. We know that isn't the case. Islamophobia does exist, but I think the demographics of the United Kingdom, the behavior that we've seen physically on the streets, the response from the police, all these things have called into question how Jews are viewing the government, that they feel unprotected, they feel unsafe, and they feel that the government certainly is not doing enough in reality, to protect them or to get to the roots of the problem, as you said.
Do you know, if you know the statistics, are you aware of how many people are leaving England
I hadn't tell you off the top of my head.
anecdotally?
Well, I mean, aliyah, thank God, always really go up and up. Yeah, unfortunately, since after December, which is, I mean, for us, it's a miracle, but for the diaspora world, it's, it's a terrible thing. We, as much as we'd love people to come to Israel to make Israel the Haredi, this is the Jewish home. I think the death of any diaspora community is a terrible thing. It's sad to bring in a bit of history that's lost, unfortunately. Places like London, which is so strong, 250,000 Jews, I think they will survive. They will continue to, I wouldn't say thrive, but they will continue to persevere. Down the line, who knows? Big picture.
As we know in Jewish history, they will persevere until they can't. Right? And then it's also too late. I want to come back to, because that's a huge issue around Israel's place in the world and its effect on the diaspora community. And I do want to come back. Let's come back to Israel. You've spent years reporting as a journalist from Jerusalem, and Israel has moved from periodic conflict to what feels like permanent conflict, endless confrontation. Are we in a forever war now?
It's a great question. And as you know, obviously Israel has never really known peace. There's always been something under the cupboard. Wars, a few years in between, even the past, sort of in the 2010s, the conflicts with Hamas were every couple of years, would flam up rockets, we'd respond, and then we'd go back to the sort of status quo. As you mentioned, the past 2.5, 3 years have been completely different in terms of militarily on the ground, the toll that they've taken on this society, in terms of people fighting for the country. So I don't think it's a forever war. I think, in my mind, there is one big elephant in the room, which we all know is Iran. Iran is responsible for a lot of the things that Hamas and Hezbollah are capable of doing. I think if we could deal with that elephant, which we tried to do, or we began to do last June, I think we had a really good opportunity February, March. I think we did phenomenal work on a military front. I think once we can deal with that, things will change. There will always be issues to do. The Palestinian issue will still be there, for example. How do we come to peace with them? The West Bank, Gaza, those kinds of things. But I think in terms of dealing with these terrorist extremist groups that are living on our periphery,
Yes.
if we can get rid of Iran, Hezbollah are a lot easier to deal with. Hamas, from basically dealt with Hamas as a military force, even though they still have some strength in Gaza. So to me, that's the way I look at it personally. People may disagree with that, but I think once you take the Iran factor out of that equation, the picture changes completely. So to me, is it forever or not necessarily?
So I've been reading a lot about what went wrong with the Iran war. And the reason I use that language is because it's persisting and it hasn't resolved into, quote, total victory. And we'll come back to him too. The Kurds didn't go into the north because Erdogan convinced Trump not to do so. The nuclear stockpile wasn't taken out when there was a plan to do so. Everything hasn't gone according to the projection. So we've got a regime here who, and it's an incredible thing to say, you decapitate their leadership to 4 levels deep. And that's the supreme leader, his deputies, the head of most of the Air Force and the command. You've decapitated the leadership and you've taken it out, and yet their dispersal of authority and power means that they'll continue to fight. They won't close the Strait of Hormuz, we were told at the beginning. They've closed the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, so we can say, Alex, let Iran for problem, and once we've got that out of the way, we can deal with the other actors. We're back in Lebanon, and we know what that's like. It's a quagmire. We haven't finished with Iran. Where do we go from here? I hear your sense of strategic direction, but I can't see it happening.
Again, I could be the personal elephant in the room, but I'm seeing And what I'm hearing from Iran, I'm very lucky that I have Iranians who are brave enough to talk to me and let me tell their voices and their stories to the world, because obviously they've had no internet for months, and many of them. I believe that the beginning of the end of the regime has already been put into place. I believe the people taking to the streets from December was something that the regime has seen before, but it was with a twist. They were chanting slogans and names that we haven't heard in 40, 50 years, which terrifies the regime. And as you mentioned, February 28th, within minutes, Ali Khamenei was dead. He didn't even know what it is. We tearing up top leadership. The word I'm hearing from Iran, from within Iran, is that the regime is in disarray. Now, we know that there are still people there. We don't go along with, in Israel, we don't go along with Trump's assertion it's a new regime, it's new people. We know that it's the same regime, the same people, and, if the many people were to take to the streets, they'd be swallowed again as they were sort of in January. We understand that's why they're not taken to the streets. You don't have to be a brave martyr, put yourself out there just for the sake of it. So I think the wheels are in motion for that, of the end of the regime. It could take time, it could take years, unfortunately. Even in 78, 79, there was a year of protests, a year before the Shah fell.
Yep.
Syria, we saw a 10-year civil war, slightly different, but these things take time. It's not necessarily everybody's thought. February 28, we've got Khamenei, and that's it, the regime is finished. I still believe that the wheels are turning, it's in motion, and we will see the regime fall to the Iranian people. And even Lebanon, I've been self-critically quite naive. I'm very optimistic about Lebanon. The Lebanese state, which has always been weak for decades, is now it's in fighting against Hezbollah within its own country to try and maintain control. But the fact, even to me, that the Lebanese have sat with the Israelis in Washington and they said, we want to take control of our country back, and all of these positive statements, I look at it really, really positively. If we can deal with Hezbollah and give the Lebanese the chance to reclaim their country, I mean, it would be a fantastic thing, both for the Lebanese people, for the northern border, for Israelis that live along the northern border.
But they have to want to, and the way they've been on this structure, the tripartite state between, Christian, Muslim, Shiite Muslim, and Druze means that they'll always have a lever in order to keep things unstable enough to allow Hezbollah, which is a cancer alert. I mean, even the president said it's a cancer alert.
Exactly.
So where does this lead? Where do you think it'll lead?
I hope it doesn't lead to us spending another 20 years on the ground with Lebanon, because I think everybody agrees, would be the worst thing.
Yeah.
I think even Benjamin Netanyahu realizes that is not the way to go. Hopefully, who knows what the future holds, but I really do hope that we can deal with it properly. In terms of the Shia issue or the Shia factor in Lebanon, again, naive optimism, but I'm hopeful that if somehow we can create a competent state that can be a partner in peace, that, first of all, Israel can help them, something we've not been able to do, for 70 years. We'll be able to contribute to the development of southern Lebanon. And it's something, again, it's the mentality aspect that we talk about so often with the Palestinians, but it's, do you want to help you? Are you more consumed by hatred for Israelis, or do you want to have a nice life for your children, a good life for your people? And hopefully there are enough people in southern Lebanon who are willing to say, do you know what? We'd like a nice life, we want peace, we're a bit fed up with everything that's been going on there. Again, naive optimism. Yeah. That's the way you've sort of got to survive in this region.
There's an expression, hope is not a strategy. As it is, hoping the regime changed in Iran, hoping that the regime in Lebanon gets its act together, does not lead us to where we need to be, but I understand the problem.
Certainly does some rapids.
Yeah. I want to talk about one of the striking things I've discovered on this trip and in speaking to people is this coexistence of deep, deep trauma. And it is everywhere. You see it, you feel it. I hear it in everybody's story. They're 1 or 2 degrees separated from you, someone killed or hurt in these forever wars of the last 2.5 years. And at the same time, the economy is booming. People are out the streets. Cost of living is ridiculous, but the restaurants are full. The resilience factor in Israeli life is enormous. And both of them are coexisting. So from what you see, because you report the news, you see it every day, my question is, how emotionally exhausted is Israeli society in swinging between these poles, and how much resolve has this war given, but how much deep, deep trauma is still yet to be unpacked?
I think we are deeply traumatized as a society, obviously, incredibly so. As you said, everybody, I don't even think we're 2 degrees away. I think everybody knows somebody who has either fought in the war or was killed in October 2nd or, has fallen, or I think everybody in the country knows. Some people have gone through, they've had their spouses fighting from, they've been away from their mother and they've been at home over the past 2.5 years. All aspects of Israeli society really have been touched slightly. We've been deeply, deeply traumatized. I mean, it's a comparison that's made often, and it's not really an exaggeration to saying that it was sort of Israel's 9/11. There was life before October 7th and there was life after October 7th. As a day itself, that day has caused deep mental scars for the whole country, not just in terms of what happened, but in terms of, looking out to the periphery. I live very, very close to the West Bank. I live in South Jerusalem, and we are 2 minutes away. There was an attempted ramming attack last night by Efrat Junction, which is, in a car 10 minutes from my house kind of thing. So you sit there sometimes wondering at night, could it happen here? Yeah, could it happen, in the northern West Bank? Could it happen again for Gaza? We don't know. But as a society, I think Israeli resilience is famous throughout the world. I think we are an incredibly tough people. I think we're willing to suffer through a lot, because we also know, the famous Golden Mayor quotes, and if we put down the weapons, there is no issue. I've had to explain this to people in the US, Americans or Brits as well, and I said to them, look, this isn't Iraq or Afghanistan where we fight thousands of miles from home, and if we lose, okay, we pop on a plane and we go back home, and it was a bit of a dodgy war, and there'll be some bad movies made in a few years' time. If we lose this war, we're not here tomorrow. And that is the ultimate difference, that we don't have a choice in this. So on the one hand, we know that we have no choice. People are willing to go through these things because we have to. I think a lot of people, as I said, they've been so exhausted and so hurt by going through, seeing people go off to reserve duty for months on end when others don't have to, maybe, or, there have been personal factors that bring people in. We, for example, at the Jerusalem Post have a mini series going on in our weekend edition where we're speaking to the wives of these reserve soldiers and what they've been going through, trying to show it from the perspective of what's it like as a wife and a mother, or how when your husband's in Lebanon for 6 months or Gaza for 6 months and you get to see them maybe twice. We try to sort of bring that focus of the woman's role and her opinion and how she sees things. But and that's especially why, by the way, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens in the upcoming elections. It has to be mentioned because this is the first one since all of this started, and so we're going to see really how the people are feeling, there was a poll, for example, last week, Reuters had a poll focusing exclusively on the northern population and how they feel about the Likud, and the Likud party's numbers have dropped, I think, from about 35% to now 23%. So you can physically see
The North was a stronghold of let's talk about he's the dominant character of Israeli political life, has been for a long time, and certainly still dominant. And of course, and I think I'm being kind when I'm saying deeply controversial is the phrase. Very, very controversial. From your perspective, again, because you see Israeli society from a very unique perspective, what explains his extraordinary political durability, despite the repeated crises? And I'm thinking of the one in 2021 and specifically, where there were riots in the streets and he was stuck. He didn't know what to do. It should have been the end of his career, but Teflon, he seems always to get through it. What's the secret to that? And what are your thoughts on where, at the moment, the next election is going to be headed?
I think first of all, it's important, to caveat that a guy who's basically been in power for 17 years, there was a break with the Lapid-Bennett government a few years ago, but pretty much since 2009, he has been, as you said, he's been the main face of Israeli politics, the leading figure. I think a lot of it is down to he's generally quite a competent politician at times. I think the fact that, he has that massive Likud support, there were a lot of the party itself, which is once upon a time, I think, was separate from Netanyahu. Nowadays, it's very hard to tell the difference between Netanyahu. That's very
Trump in that way. He runs the party as his machine. Trump's just done it, and he's been doing it.
Well, that's one of the things that has been sort of leveled at him, is that he has removed any threat to his authority, which on one hand is great for his political longevity, but it doesn't really help the party. It doesn't necessarily help the country when it's time for him to go, if he's got rid of anybody who could make a decent politician, because he viewed there was a threat to himself. Obviously, there has been a lot of litigious issues regarding his trial and alleged corruption. Now, if you ask Bibyists, as we call them, similar to Trump in America, it's a kind of mini cult of personality. The man could do no wrong. Everything is a witch hunt against him. If you ask the other side, the guy's a complete criminal. The most corrupt person in Israeli history. How on earth he's managed to hold on to power is incredible. And as usual, the truth is probably somewhere in between. Obviously, we have to see what happens in terms of the legal outcome of his trial. There are talks still going on with the president in terms of should he be pardoned, should he not be.
Particularly his interest as a politician. Like any politician, delay it till after the election and think, let's assume that gets delayed, right? For many Israelis, October 7th is a catastrophic failure of leadership. His political, and it was called the conception, if I have it right, about how Hamas would be and how the northern border would be, is completely wrong. There's no accountability for that. Netanyahu's fighting tooth and nail to not have a commission of inquiry at the level of the Agranat Commission of 1973, which ultimately removed the government as it took ownership. There's a lot that is not happening here. Of course, there's a Haredi, and then there's his cancer. So, Israelis, from what you see from the polls, over time, they're going to vote him back in, or is it going to be, it's enough, it's a shift? What are you seeing here now?
I mean, the latest polls show the Likud where it generally always is, sort of 30 to 35 seats, depending on the wee bit, depending on what's happened. And I think, again, that's because the party itself has a widespread support among what I would say normal Israelis. By that, I mean...
But not the north. The north is strong.
Not the north, no. But I mean, outside of the Haredi sector or the Arab sector or others, I think the Likud generally still has a wide-based support. Listen, I look at it, my personal point of view, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I've voted for Netanyahu a few times. I have no qualms admitting that. Because I want to know, just last podcast as a journalist, but I look at it personally and I say, look, Neville Chamberlain will forever go down in the history books with the word appeasement next time.
Yeah.
Benjamin Netanyahu will forever now go down to the history books. Whatever may happen with Iran, whatever may happen with Hezbollah, October 7th will always, and should be, attached to his name. Whether he, claims he had no idea what was happening and he was asleep or he got woken up, it doesn't matter. He was the prime minister on that day. There were many, many governments around the world where the prime minister wouldn't have lasted afterwards. He would have resigned either gracefully or ungracefully. There are times in history shown where people do cling on to power after terrible events. But yeah, history to me will always show that. There's nothing he can do to change that. Doesn't matter what happens. Should he hold the state of commission, a commission of inquiry that absolves him of most of the blame, or however one wants to frame it. That to me is a huge caveat. Looking ahead, I think it's not just the war. There are obviously so many factors that now come into play, especially the massive one that we've yet to touch on is the Haredi factor, which has really become even bigger than it has been, and it's been a massive issue in this country for years, but it's coming to a head because so many people done so much resurgency because so many people, and it's not just a resurgency, because of this, people are not working, businesses are closing, livelihoods are affected, the schools are closed, children can't learn, all these things come into play. So then, in addition to that, when you have a whole sector of society who refuse to fight and who appear to be getting handouts free from the government,
Well, unpack.
well, pretty Walsh.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not an appeal. It's a fact. They are funded. Let's do some math. All right.
Your maths is probably a lot better than mine. It's why I write as opposed to.
I got it. So we've got a Knesset, just for our listeners, a Knesset of 120 seats, right? So you said Likud is 30 to 35. The Haredi party, how many are they?
They usually Shas usually gets about 8 to 10. UTJ the same. Soleil and yeah, I think that's correct.
Okay, so we've got 30 to 35, and then there's sort of 16 to 20 block. And then you get the Ben Gvir block. I'm going to come back to the Ben Gvir issue in a minute. But after his humiliation of the flotilla, he went from 8 to 9 in the polls, which I tried to understand it. And someone explained to me, and we will come back to the math. I tried to understand it, and someone put it to me very simply. He said, what Ben Gvir represents to some is an FU attitude. And given Israel's isolation in the world, a strategic issue that I also want to come back to, because I think that's a really big problem. But that FU, we're going to do what we think is right because you hate us anyway in the world. And if you had your way, you'd stop bombing us anyway. Means that someone on that extreme can only increase their vote, right? The more outrageous, the more Trumpist, the more Tucker Carlson. I mean, we can, in Australia, we talk about one nation. The more extreme on the right, the more there's an attraction.
Well, then when you yes, Moravich in the last poll last weekend failed to pass the electoral threshold. We guessed he was very, very interesting.
What? So he represents the part of the religious Zionist settler movement of the West Bank. And I know there are two wings in that. The wing that my family belonged to, or much live in Alon Sport. In the Yeshiva, they're completely opposed to this sort of violent takeover. They're very law-abiding and they're quite progressive. But the other wing is very violent and aggressive, and we see that in the news all the time. So why is Smotrich losing votes? Is it going to the Ben Gvir?
I think it is. I think a lot of his voters, they're not changing, they're not waking up in the morning with a new identity. I think a lot of them, as you say, are probably saying, this is the guy who's willing to stand up and shout for us. And
it's how I feel, isn't it? Real.
Well, I think a lot of it is, and again, people who live over the Green Line obviously have a unique perspective of how these things look. They're the ones who live there. They're the ones who are the literal front lines. I think a lot of people in Israel, I think most people in Israel will probably tell you that Oslo is dead. The idea of a two-state solution, or certainly the way it was conceived 30 years ago, is no longer feasible. And so I think a lot of people are, on one hand, sick of being dictated to, or being told, no, you need to learn to live with peace, or you need to learn to come to some kind of arrangement. The mentality is, this is our homeland, this is our biblical homeland. If there is no sort of dotted line physically across the ground that splits ancient Israel from modern Israel, this is all part of our land. So, like you said, it's a massive sort of FU to the Israelis on the other side of the political spectrum. It's a massive FU to the international community who, for decades, have tried to tell these people where to live, how to live, who they should live next to. I think that plays a huge part in it. And again, we live in an age now, unfortunately, where maybe it was different back in the day, or maybe it was exactly the same, and I'm just seeing it for the first time, but this soundbite extremist has come to the fore, and this sort of old school politician of, okay, maybe we don't necessarily agree, but we can sit around a table and speak things out. That seems to be dead in the water. I mean, Ben Gvir is, he seems to be good at what he does because he gets the vote. But like you said, even the other week with the flotilla incident, is an embarrassment to Israeli politics. You know,
He is. Israelis know that, and I'll come back to the significance of that in a minute. But on these numbers, Likud 30 to 35, Haredi 8 to 10, Shas, which is the Eastern, how would I describe Shas? It comes to the Sephardi religious is 8 to 10, and Ben Kadir is 8 to 9. We're looking at 55 to 64, which is a majority of the Knesset. And that's all he needs. That's all Bibi needs. So at the lower end, there's 55. At the top end, he's got a majority. So either way, it's going to be incredibly close, no matter what happens. So
it's going to be so interesting. You know, there's so many, not just unknowns, but again, this is the first one since October 7th. So it'll be really interesting to see what I term normal Israelis, you know, not people of specifically one party, really, like a West Bank settler or a you know, far left person who lives in Tel Aviv, for example, you know, that normal sort of middle bloc who their veteran swing. It'll be really interesting to see, if October 7th and the succeeding war has changed their views. We have an unknown in Gadi Eisenkot, who's come in, you know, former chief of staff at the IDF, and we've seen in the past, Benny Gantz came in, I think it was 2018, the first time he stood. He did really well. You know, he came in, he wasn't able to capitalize on that, unfortunately, to the extent he could have. So it'd be really interesting to see how Eisenkot does. We have Naftali Bennett, who's taken, you know, a few years off. He was a former prime minister in a shortage government, Yair Lapid. They've come back together. It'll be interesting to see his voters return to him, or if they found it different.
But on these numbers, the issue isn't them. The issue, I'd say, Bet Gvir, Shas, and Haredi, I've now got a block of somewhere between 25 and 30. It's Likud that's the issue. Look, will Likud split? And I know there's always talk about the moderate wing and the hard. Bibi runs it. So how real is the Likud's base? How much could it disintegrate between now and the election, given all the issues that we're talking about? October 7th, accountability, a commission inquiry, not Bibi's cancer, kept quiet, everything, the total victory that isn't a total victory. How much is Likud, do you think, in a position to split up or not?
I think, in my opinion, most politicians within the Likud who could have a chance are, I think they're just simply waiting for Bibi to retire. And then they're going to make the move. You know, even people on the outside. I don't want to start bringing in names, but I think so. I think
If you did bring a name, what would it be?
I let people I look at people like Yossi Cohen, for example, from Wasabta, you know, director who is doing very well in business on the side. I'm sure, I mean, there's definitely big conversations about will he wait to get to politics, that kind of thing. And I think there's a lot of people similar to that who are sort of sitting around waiting for Netanyahu to retire because they realize there will be this gap. It's very hard to dismount him, especially if he's going to retire. It's Bibi going to retire, then have to drag him out in a his mid-70s. At some point, he kind of has to. For him, I would wish him like Gavin and Jones. You've served the country.
This is true. This is right. Everyone's the same. They're all the same. Everyone. They're all, very few politicians leave willingly.
This is true. I hope he does have the common sense. After all the legal business is dealt with and everything, I hope he does have the common sense to say, I've saved my country and now it's time to go and enjoy the fruits of my labor. I wish you well, but we won't have to see. I think we've seen in the past as well, you know, people within the Likud, such as Gideon Saar, who have tried to stick their head above, you know, the sand, and they were sort of pushed back down. He left for the new party for himself, ended up being roped back in. We've seen people try it before. Bibi's a master of this. So I think, unfortunately, it sounds quite negative to say we have to wait for you to retire.
And because he's so dominant, and the political party is so his.
It has us right, guys. Is they have such a, and I think one of the aspects is that they don't. Obviously, you can bring in sort of how Netanyahu has dealt with Hamas over the past 15, 20 years, that kind of thing. But I think as a party, the Likud's base is rooted in national security. And I think that comforts a lot of people as well. A lot of people say the Likud party will never give up land for this, or that kind of idea. They'll never be willing to compromise any parts of Israel or Israeli identity for peace. And I think that has kept people kind of on their spot to an extent.
Yeah, let me take issue with that. I mean, it's an observation, and if I may make a comment about that, Bibi styles himself as Winston Churchill. That's his figure. He's got the photo, I think, of Winston, or the statue, whatever it is, in his office. He sees himself as a man who stood up against the forces of evil. But Winston Churchill did it with a whole lot of allies around him in order to give him the ability to fight when England was almost defeated, exhausted by the war. Lend-Lease saved. As we know, Roosevelt and the rest of the world came in behind them. There's a growing argument. I've heard now the term strategic threat to the battlefield is no longer just a military one. Israel is a military hegemon. It is strategically, from a military perspective, never been as strong, in the sense that I'm talking about the territory in which it occupies. But informational, international legitimacy, media framing, social media ecosystems, and Western public opinion has Israel at the bottom of the heap. I think there's no secret. It's no secret. What I've been witnessing it coming to Israel now is that I'm not sure Israelis fully comprehend the strategic nature of that loss of legitimacy in the world. Number one. Second part of that, in a post-Trump world, we've either got the Democrats and, the best bet could be a Kamala Harris, who is no great fan of Israel, to the Madani league. And in the Republican movement, you've got the Vance Carlson league, and you've got the remnant of the old guard, or the old-fashioned Lindsey Graham fans of Israel. So America's not looking great. We see anyone, I think it's under the age of 39, 60-something percent, always worried about that. Everybody says 60%, but the majority of people are no longer seeing Israel, in a positive light. This is the new challenge. This is the strategic threat. How do you think Israelis do or do not see it? And how much can Israel influence what is going to be a long-term consequence in a post-Bibi era?
An amazing question, because I think, honestly, day to day, I think most Israelis probably would tell you it doesn't bother them, which is a scary thing. But I think it has to be caveated as well with saying that you can tell me, because obviously living outside of Israel, you get to see things obviously very, very differently. We know that Israel is losing the PR war. It's losing badly. I think part of it is not helped when it doesn't matter what Israel does. We know that it will be framed negatively. That includes the media. Unfortunately, working in the media, I would never like to throw dirt on other organizations, but feel free to do. Well, let's be frank. We've seen a lot of media organizations over the past 2.5 years throwing around words or throwing around terms.
That's cool. Our Al-Jazeera, which is the source feed for the BBC, and the Australian Broadcasting Commission, and our special broadcasting service, Net Community. It's just Al-Jazeera feed. We see it a lot in CNN. Because they don't have offices on the ground, they're reliant on stringers and Al-Jazeera for feed. So let's call it. It is a pop-up. But the larger strategic threat this poses, I don't think Israel is coming to grips with that.
It's absolutely not. I don't know, definitely not. Certain things don't help. Like a small side point, in my opinion, for example, we have a diaspora minister who I think this is a perfect opportunity, for example, for Netanyahu to put a diaspora minister who can speak English who maybe grew up in the diaspora, who has a connection to the outside community. That's just an example. Instead, he puts an
And Israeli plays political games with his
that's just sort of a very small example of a childish of how maybe we could do things better slightly to the exception of the outside world. It's part of the ongoing battle. I think America, in and of itself, has a lot of issues. It's an internal struggle going on at that country for its own soul, I think. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say. We saw somebody standing the other week in Texas for a Democratic primary who said they should turn one of the ICE centers into a prison for anti-Zionists. This was on their campaign trail, So a part of it is...
Sorry, not as a prison center for anti-Zionist, a prison center for Zionists.
So yes, sir.
Let's be very clear.
Prison center for American Zionists.
For American Zionists, which is code for we know what.
Yes, exactly. So on one hand, you could say, well, we need to fight this. And on the other hand, again, we're sitting in Israel looking out and going, why shouldn't we even put up a fight? Like, this is the future of the party, or this is the kind of mentality of a lot of people in the party. Why do we need to fight this? Now, America's a really interesting example because even, there's a lot going on at the moment about us kind of detaching ourselves in Israel from American aid, from American help. Even Netanyahu said, within a decade, we sort of want to be...
We've got to be self-sufficient.
Self-sufficient. He reads it. He knows it as. Exactly. Yeah, I've realized the way the future is going.
All these years of making Israel a partisan issue in the US is now paying off. And it's a disaster because Israel used to be non-partisan. It was never, yes, and I know October 7th has changed that, but it was never, and it's this playing into partisan politics that's 100% long-term is immediate gain, but long-term is it just...
So, well, if we're successful in detaching ourselves in the way that we would like to, if we can do that,
yes,
we sort of...
Can we? Do you think we can? Rather capacity? It's possible.
I don't think it's impossible, that's for sure. I don't think it's impossible. Obviously, America, I think it's possible. It's massive. It's, a massive help to it. I love having that behind our backs years after us. But it would also, if we are successful, it would remove that sort of partisan element for politics. People would stop using Israel/Jewish issues such as AIPAC and other things like that. It wouldn't become a part of the conversation in American politics, which I think is for the better, both for Israel and for the Jewish community over there, for sure. So I think the more we can work to that, the better. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, obviously, in the US as well over the coming years. The midterms are going to be interesting, but obviously the presidential election, who stands? Because that's still up for debate. I was in New York last weekend when somebody was beyond convinced that Trump was going to stand for third term, despite the legal... They were beyond convinced. They said it's not even a question he's going to stand. I had another person tell me he won't make it. He'll be gone well before this. So who knows? Again.
So is the Israel-America relationship, which you observe very closely, is it structurally changed beneath? I mean, I have to take a step back, and the context here is the intimacy, and it's the only word, between the IDF and the US military over Iran is an extraordinary thing. I've never seen anything like it. It is an extraordinary thing. But beneath the surface, post-Trump, has it structurally changed to the degree where we will go no longer in alliance, or will it be just go the way of Europe, ultimately just disaffected with Israel?
My honest opinion, is that it may take 10 years, it may take 50 years, but we will see the US go that way. I think we will. I think we should be prepared for the day where the US is unfortunately no longer a friend of Israel. I think it's, given the world that we're seeing today, the ultra is that, we discussed at the beginning, countries where you would never have thought or dreamed of things like this happening to Jews or to opinions of Israel driving through the streets, saying things about Israel in Australia or Britain. I don't think it's a far leap to say America, given what we're seeing on the streets there, given the political language from politicians that were here being used, not even regular people on the streets, but the politicians themselves are using this language, particularly one party of the other, but I think it is.
Democrats are the, yeah, it is. From it, we had that problem here, there, everywhere.
So yeah, I can certainly envisage a day where Israel, and it's ironic, you look at the Gulf countries and what they've gone throh, both in terms of dealing with Iran, but also the Abraham Accords. The issue of Saudi normalization has been sort of whispered under the table for 6 years now. It could be insane, but we could be talking about a situation 30 years where Israel and the Gulf are hand in hand in this beautiful relationship, and maybe, possibly, and the US is sort of fallen by the wayside.
I want to come to the Gulf, but before I do, one more question, just to shine a light on this strategic threat that exists. Israelis are saying to me, and I interviewed Bunker Lauren not long ago, and he said we should cut our relationship with Europe in a sense that we don't need them and they don't need us. And I reminded him that there's a multi-billion dollar, I think it's $30 billion scientific fund between Israel and Europe. And that fund has a direct relationship to Startup Nation, that the ability for that capital, that venture capital, to be available to do all the things that Israel does so brilliantly is not to be sneezed at. And yet, Israelis at the clever level of Michael Lauren go, "No, we don't need you." I just don't think they get it. I'm just not sure.
There's two things. Money talks, as in that situation. Yes,
They shut that fund. Israel's in trouble.
So it is, but I think Europe fluctuates. Small example is sort of Slovenia. Yeah, in the past week, Haredi, the new government, the last government didn't want anything to do with us. The new government was a previous prime minister who loves Israel. We were there within a day wishing congratulations of this.
So I think that last governor's last days, just for listeners who don't know, tell us what happened to the Israel.
Well, they got
they weren't allowed to land, and they told him that's a declaration.
So I think, at one point, on one hand, we're very pragmatic in terms of Europe. Then money, we look at it like, if you're willing to deal with us, we're happy to deal with you. Ireland is sort of example kind of thing where the Irish think some kind of want nothing to do with us, and we're like, all right, fine, that's you. It's going to be your loss in the end. That's sort of how we try and look at it and frame it. That we will roll with any punches that are thrown at us, in financial, military, whatever you want to throw at us. And I think, again, naive optimism, my life is filled with it, but as we come back to it, I think most countries in the end will realize, actually, we can want to be on Israel's side. We want to, be in business.
In business with Israel, maybe not on their side, but that's a problem. That's a real problem. Let's talk about the region. You mentioned the Abraham Accords, the Sunni Arab states outside of Iran. Where is that relationship now? And post-Iran war, whatever that timing looks like, unless it's a forever multi-year domain. But how do you see that evolving? There's always a cause for optimism, and that there's brakes put on it with some pessimism. From your perspective, what do you see the evolution happening?
I think there were definitely steps that we can take in terms of during the Iran war, and it happened a little bit in the Gulf War, but obviously it wasn't the same in terms of sides against each other. We had countries like the UAE and Kuwait suffering Iranian bombardment, which obviously we were also perpetrated. So when that said we were on the same side, it should give us a platform or a pitch to be able to say, the UAE we actually have decent ties with. They've been one of the major success stories of the Abraham Accords. But people like the Kuwaitis, the Saudis who can't do this, we could sort of turn to them and say, look, we have the opportunity now to build a new Middle East. We can look forward to the future. If we can sort of put the past in the past, there's no reason that it can't be, there can't be a beautiful future. I know it's very, sort of the diplomats on the diplomatic side of things, the politicians are optimistic that over the coming years, there will be additions to the Abraham Accords. I don't think anybody is not expecting that, but I think we can even further deepen those relationships. I look at it also, the UAE is a very just one, So many Israelis fly on a basic level, fly over to Dubai, for example, as a as a weekend getaway something. But we don't see many Emiratis walking around here. And I think also we have the opportunity now to be able to expand that side of things, to say to them, look, come, on a business side, things are very positive.
Yes, but like Egypt, we've had a peace treaty with them since 1979, which now see like Egyptians so much wandering the streets, it's totally would wrestle. Yeah, that's that. We in Australia, because we're close to Indonesia, so we see this golden triangle. Saudi, UAE, money, and they are looking for a post-war world, and they build their data centers and they're building AI universities, amazing stuff. The golden triangle, petrodollars, Indonesia, country of 200 million, wanting desperately to advance, Israel tech, agri-tech, eco-tech, high-tech. That golden triangle would be incredible. But Israel hasn't been able to bring it off yet. And it's been, a decade. Bibi's been in the slot for it more than a decade saying, it's all going to happen, it's all going to happen. This doesn't happen.
This is true. I mean, I will give them the benefit of the doubt and say we've been slightly preoccupied, over the past couple of years, but
we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
This is true. I mean, one thing, another caveat is with this US president, the Trump power, anything is, he could turn up tomorrow, he say, well, Indonesia is signing the Abraham Accords. We could, the unthinkable peace between Israel and the Qatar, where it's just, anything is possible under this president, because God knows what God knows what he's thinking, God knows what he's doing. But I think, again, like you said, most countries are sort of, especially the historical enemies of Israel. We touched on Lebanon before. Lebanon has been involved in every conflict against Israel since 1948. And the fact, again, that they're willing to turn around and say, actually, do you know what? We're kind of ready to talk peace. I think if countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, all these kind of places that we've never really had relations with are willing to turn around and say, do you know what? We're now with the 2020s. We're looking at what happened to Iran with their extremist sort of policies and stuff. Maybe let's look forward. I definitely think we'll see over the coming years. I think, without a doubt, I think we will see more signatories to the Abraham Accords. I think, obviously, the biggest catch is probably Saudi Arabia.
But they insist on a resolution or a framework of resolution of Palestine issue, which Netanyahu and the Likud can't deliver.
For sure. Maybe it's down to the next leadership. Maybe that was when Haredi says
maybe it's a post-Bibi, post-Trump duel.
It could be, and we've seen that throughout our history, sort of. And he becomes an obedient Trump for the ones to deal with Iran, the issues that we spoke about before, and then afterwards it's left to others, younger or different people with different opinions, to build this new Middle East.
That's a very, very optimistic.
Having you brought some wisdom,
yeah,
that gets me through the day.
So, after covering Israel, Alex, through such painful period, these 2.5 years, people in the West just don't understand. They don't understand it. Such pain and historic change. Do you believe that Israel truly, putting aside your optimism, your natural optimism, which shines out, do you really believe Israel emerges from this period stronger and more unified? And it's two adjectives. Or more internally fractured and strategically isolated than before, Sen?
Is it possible to be both?
It's so Israeli. Got to answer.
Excuse me. Tell me what you mean. I mean, in terms of the outside world, we are the Israeli people. They look at us as the Israeli people. The way that we deal with them is as Israelis. Now if you differentiate, if you're dealing with an Israeli, whether you're from Tel Aviv or from Efrat or from Meshabi, to them you're an Israeli, you behave the same way, you act the same way. But obviously, as touched upon, here in Israel, there are so many different fractures across society, which I think we have to heal. I think even though the economy is doing well, as I mentioned, a lot of people have suffered over the past 2.5 years. A lot of people are still suffering. I think once all this is dealt with, and obviously it's a big if and when, but once it is all dealt with in some semblance of peace, even if we can just stop the rockets.
Let's call peace at this stage a non-violent.
Yes, conflict. Yeah. Now I'm talking peace treaties, and now we're talking about
The resolution of war.
it's been a constant for 2.5 years. And once people can get their lives back on track, I think we will emerge from this. We're a new generation of Israelis coming through. We have not been politicians for decades or years. The young Israelis coming through will always have October 7th and the war on their shoulders and in their minds. I think it's in the back of everything we do now. As I said, there was life before and there's life afterwards. And I think everything now is framed around that. It's sort of, not that it's the sun at the center of our solar system, but it's constantly in our mind. It's constantly there in the back of our phones. It's there when we're dealing with diaspora. It's there when we're dealing with non-Jews, especially. And that obviously affects things that we just like business, diplomacy. Sure. I think moving forward, we will see a stronger Israel. I think this election, we've got to get to see what happens. But if we can get to the stage of where the skies are cleared of missiles and rockets and people can get back to some semblance of normal life, I think we will emerge a much stronger people. We've seen this, by the way, the diaspora as well. We talked about more people coming to Israel. I sat this morning with a girl from New Zealand who came in 2024, and she said, it wasn't until October 7th that I realized how much I want to be. She picked up, left a beautiful country, New Zealand, to come to this madhouse. So, more and more people as well are realizing that this is the place for us. And that makes us stronger.
People are psychologically safer in this madhouse than a beautiful country with beaches that we live in.
So that's parts that Israeli resilience that gets into it. We have that mentality of we're going to get it done. Stand strong and fight and keep going.
Alex Winston from Your Lips to God's Ear and news editor of the Jerusalem Post. It has been a real treat to get your insights into what is happening in Israel, what is happening in the world. And may you and your family stay safe, and may Israel continue to be strong and safe and find the ways towards peace.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.